Hello, I'm Saradipa, and I'm here to talk about understanding research experimental in um, research in ELT. And my name is Artipa, and my friend Dwipok Triangle, and here's the presentation. The first slide there is what is experimental in research. So the key concept is to seek to establish a cause and effect relationship. Second point, there is ELT context. So, it is involved deliberately manipulating one educational factor, example like a teaching method, to observe its impact on student learning outcomes. The last point, there is key point or list. First point, there is purpose, to test hypothesis about teaching efficiency. Second is mechanism, comparison between groups, control versus experimental. The first point, there is purpose, that is to test hypothesis about teaching efficiency. Mechanism, comparing between groups, so like control versus experimental. The last point, there is goal, to produce objective quantifiable data. Next slide, there is the 4 pillars, or we can call it key characteristic. First, there is manipulation. So the researcher deliberately changed the independent variable, like the example is teaching method. Second, there is control. So keeping extraneous variables constant to ensure that result is due to the treatment. Second, there is randomization. As the logo, that is dice. Assigning participants to groups randomly to eliminate selection bias. The last one, there is measurement. Using valid instrument task survey to quantify the change in the dependent variable. Next slide, there is variable in the language classroom. So there is scenario 2, there is testing the effect of Duolingo on vocabulary retention. We can go to the logo here. There is the first one, there is independent variable, or we can call it IV. And the definition of IV, that is the cause or the treatment, what is changed. Now, the example, the use of Duolingo for 15 minutes daily versus traditional flashcard. The next example, there is dependent variable. The definition of that is the effect or the outcome of what is measured. Example, it's like the student scores on a standardized vocabulary post test. The definition to effect. Second, there is dependent variable, or DV. The definition of it is that the effect or the outcome what is measured. Example, the student scores on a standardized vocabulary on post test. Second, the next slide, there is types of research design. The first one, there is pre-experimental. The biggest form lacks a control group or randomization, often just a case study. The next slide, there is types of research design. There is 3, honestly. The first one is pre-experimental, second quasi-experimental, and the third is true experimental. The first one, there is pre-experimental. Pre-experimental is the weakest form, lacks a control group or randomization, often just a case study. Second, there is quasi-experimental. It's common in school, used in tech classes, so there is no random assignment, but includes a control group. Experimental, the true experimental, the gold standard includes randomization, so it's like control group and manipulation. So there is a quote. It says that without the control group, it is impossible to know if the improvement was caused by your teaching method or simply by the passage of time. Design explain the most basic and flawed design in this is the shot case study, symbolized as X, O, treatment followed by observation or measurement. It involves applying a treatment and then measuring the result without any baseline or comparison group. Second point, there is why void or elaboration. This design suffers from fatal flaws and internal validity. A, no baseline, since there is no pretest or O1. There is no way to establish the participant in language proficiency before the treatment acts. Any observed scores O could be their natural skill level. O or B, there is no control. So the absence of control group means the result or vulnerable to every threat to internal validity, history, maturation, etc. You cannot competently interpret the outcome to your teaching method. So, warning, avoid one-shot case studies in serious research. The next slide that is quasi-experimental or in the school reality. There is 2 points. The first is explanation of interclasses, and the second the critical role of the pre-task. The first point is explanation of interclasses. Quasi-experimental design are necessary when researcher cannot perform random assignment due to real-world limitation. They must use pre-existing group, such as interclasses, like example class 7A and class 7B. School administrator rarely allow researchers to disrupt established schedules and classes to create randomly mixed groups. Second, the critical role of the pre-task. Since randomization is missing, we crucial serve as a necessary compromise to measure whether the intact group or are statistically comparable in the dependent variable. Example like language profile.
So here I am. I will explain about the true experiment structure and why is it the gold standard. And the first, true experimental design, like for the example, like for the pre-test, post-test control group design, it's over the highest internal validity. Random assignment, such as R, is used to place participant into the experimental group, or group A, or control group, or the group B, ensuring the groups are equivalent at the start. This rigorous control isolates the teacher method or the X. The teaching methods, it could be symbolized as the X as the likely cause of any difference between the groups after the post-test. And the structure of the experimental structure is often symbolized as a group A or experimental. It's R01X and X02. And the group B, or for the control, it's R01 and then like there is garis 02. This minimization of initial difference and extraneous variable is what makes the design the gold standard for established causation. Or did the X really cause the change in 02 or not? That is the true experiment of this experiment structure. And for the validity, is the research true? And of course, in this research types, there are 2 types of validity. The first, the cause are for the treatment, and what is it change? And then the second is dependent validity or DV. Is the effect or the outcome what is measured. Example is, for the example, there is a student score on a standardized vocabulary post-test. And then there is a common trait to internal validity. Well, external event occurring during the study, for like the example, a sudden school event or an intensive English course outside of school, the affect the result but are not in the intended treatment. This is a significant issue if the event affect one group more than the other. And for the measuration, it for this trait internal validity, the change in participant performance due to natural development or biological or psychological, not the treatment for younger ELT learners. This could mean natural cognitive growth leading to better language retention. And then there is the task effect. There is the task effect. Participants' knowledge or awareness of the task influence their performance that could be include pre-test sensitization, or it could like pre-test itself give participant clue or makes them more attentive to the material being taught. And then the second there is practice. Of course, like simply getting better at the task format by taking it multiple times. And then there is the third, instrumentation. The instrument or task, survey, or observation criteria change over the course of the study. For the example, its different version of a task vary in the difficulty, or if the observers' grading standards drift over time. And then the fourth, there is like morality or attrition. Participant dropping out of the study. This become a trait if more students drop out of one group than the other, especially if the drops share common characteristic. Like for the example, lower motivation or lower initial score, making the remaining group not equivalent. So we just because of visual, I can represent times or change. So for the visual, of course, it could represent what's the time and what's the change in that we research about. Okay, next. Okay, so for the next there is the experimental process. For the experimental process, there is the first. There is like a couple steps, like for the time to do the experimental process. The first, we have to find the hypothesis, which is define the IV or the DV. And then after that, after done with the hypothesis, we have to do the pretest or to establish the baseline. And after the pretest is done, we have to do the protest, or which is which is after the pretest, we have to do the treatment first, or applying the new teaching method. So we will know about or found the things that will work to apply it to the students. And then after that, after the treatment is done, we have to do the post-test, which is it could measure the result. And after we do the post-test and know the result, we have to analyze or compare the data between the groups, 2 groups or more. Oh no, it could be like 2 groups. And after we analyze, and then we do the visualization or the visual, which is we make the timeline graphic illustrating the sequences. So which is we have to make the graphic between the 2 groups or more than these groups to find or to compare them. And then after that there is the ethical consideration, which is the ethical, which is for the ethic, or the basic ethic, or the ethical that we should do when we were doing the research. We have to inform consent. Student or the parent have known that they are part of the study cases. So we have to let them know that, or maybe ask them a permission before we do the study cases. And then, right to withdraw, participant can leave at any time without penalty. So if they feel like they want to leave, yeah, they have to leave. And then, the control group or the dilemma. Is it ethical to withhold a potentially beneficial teaching method? So, which is it like give any benefits to this researcher or the person that wants to study about it? And then, for the solution, we have to offer the effective method to the control group after the study conclude, or it could be called delayed treatment. And then for the visual image related to agreement or a handshake, which is an agreement, they have to be approved of the agreement when you already went to make sure or to prove that the person want to be studied. And then for the conclusion, experimental research established causally or it could through experiments require randomization. Quasi-quasius experiments are most common in ELT and always control for internal validity trait. So which is the goal is to find evidence-based method that genuinely help students learn English more effectively. Okay, so I guess that's all for my presentation. If you have any question about it or maybe you find it hard to understand, you can just drop question down below or in the LMS. Okay, thank you. That's all for our presentation. So sorry if there's any mistake. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.